Hi, and thank you for joining us today on Breaking Free from Churchianity. I learned a few years ago that doing something without the right tools is asking to fail. I didn't really grow up doing a lot of projects. My dad was not a handyman, and so I learned to change the oil in my car and things like that. But for the most part, I wasn't really a handy guy around the house. I got by, but that's about it. But one day I had to do some work in the yard, which required me to cut off some branches of some trees that had matured. And I began to realize that I couldn't reach those branches. I just simply didn't have the tools to do it. And so I went down to the hardware store and I got an extension tool with a cutter on the end of it, and I came back. And man, I got that job done fast. I mean, it did not take me very long at all to cut those branches off. It's amazing what having the right tool will do. Churchianity also has a tool that it wields, and it has wielded this tool very effectively for many, many years, and it is called the tool of hell. I was once in a service where the preacher titled his sermon, Christians in Hell. Yeah, Christians in Hell, and it got my attention, probably got most people's attention, because we were taught that Christians don't go to hell. And he went on to assert that many made decisions and were baptized, but were never really saved because their lives did not reflect the change. In other words, they'd made a decision, but there was no outward change in their life to give evidence of the fact that they had genuinely made a decision for Christ. How can you judge another individual? Matter of fact, Jesus said, why do you judge your brother when you have a log in your own eye? Why do you judge the speck in your brother's eye when you have a log in your own eye? Hell is the tool, if you will, that Churchianity uses to create the fear and enforce its dogma, control of the people, maintain order in institutions and in organizations. But that is all it is. It's a tool. Nothing more, nothing less. The word hell is not actually in the Old or New Testament because it is neither a Hebrew nor Greek word. Some of the words from the original Hebrew and Greek text that are translated as hell actually mean something else. The first one is the word Sheol. Sheol is a Hebrew word, and it means the pit or grave. It really has the ideal of that which is unseen, that which you can no longer see. It's used exclusively in the Old Testament, in the Jewish scriptures. Sheol normally was talking about the grave. It was normally talking about a place that people went and their bodies were buried there, and they would call that Sheol. There is no developed doctrine of hell in the Jewish scriptures. That's why you can talk to those who are in Judaism, and they'll tell you that. They'll tell you, no, there is no hell. They don't believe in hell. Sheol should never be translated as hell. You can translate it as the pit, the grave. That's fine. I got no problem with that, but not hell. The next word is Hades. Hades is a Greek word. It's a compound word, as many Greek words are. It comes from ha, which means not, and ido, meaning see. So it means not to see, not to be able to see. Properly, the unseen place, referring to the invisible realm in which all the dead reside. And this doesn't mean good and bad people, just all the dead reside there. The present dwelling place of all the departed souls, those who are deceased. It comes from Greek mythology, and Hades was actually a god. He was god of the underworld. He was god of that area where the souls departed to. Now, it did not start out as being a place of punishment, and people wouldn't have seen it as that. The next word is Gehenna. Now, Gehenna was originally the name of a valley or cavity near Jerusalem. It was a place underneath the earth. It was a garbage dump that burned perpetually. Gehenna was also the place where we believe that Solomon set up most of the idols that his foreign wives wanted. And so they would set up all these different idols to their different gods. So Gehenna had become a place of just garbage and refuge. And because of that, there was just always some sort of fire burning because there was just always so much trash there. Jesus used it as a symbolic form He uses a lot of hyperbole to try and get people's attention about the seriousness of not leading anyone astray, especially into the law. Okay? Those who lead others into works and self-effort in the law, this is really who that is being aimed at. Because his point was to bring people to their spirit, to focus them on spirit, not the law, not self-effort, not outward things. So he had a real strong warning for people who did that. The last one is Tartaro from Greek mythology, or Tartarus. It's the place of the dead, or the underworld is how it became known. Tartarus was actually at one point considered a type of god who would oversee the dead soldiers of the Greek enemies who had died in battle. Later, it was considered a place of the dead and a place of the underworld where people would be punished. However, it's only used one time in 2 Peter 2:4, and it refers to the punishment of fallen angels, and it was like the place where God would keep them until the time of final judgment. Now, none of these words, Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, or Tartarus, have anything to do with a place of eternal punishment and torment. The words for Hades were used because of the mythology, the ancient mythology that many of the people would have been familiar with, especially Greeks. But Greeks wouldn't have seen Hades as a place of eternal torment. They wouldn't have seen it as a place of eternal punishment. So if you're going to use something that has something to do with eternal punishment, it would be better to use words of that nature. All right, we've looked at the different words that are used, the underlying words of the Greek and Hebrew that the translators have used for hell. Now let's look at the origin of the English word hell, which is an English word. It comes from the Old English and is derived from the Old German. It's first seen in ancient writings around 725 A.D. In this instance, the word has to do with those who go to the place of the dead, and it comes out of Norse mythology. Translated into German, from German, the Old German, to the Old English, from the Old English to today. And that's where it came from. It did not come from the Greek. It did not come from the Hebrew. It was added from the English language and put in place of these other words. Now, can you see how that could be a problem? Now, there is no recorded use of the word until 317 A.D., in which time it was used in a book called Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno is when it was first seen in an English book, the word hell. And so that's the first recorded use of it. So you're talking, over 1,300 years after the time of the resurrection and the time when the other New Testament books would have been written. The early church fathers generally agreed on the eventual restoration of all things in Christ, including unbelievers, Satan, and demons. Most did. But over time, some of that began to change and it began to evolve. Origen, who wrote in the late 2nd century and early 3rd centuries, believed and taught in universal salvation that all would in time be restored. However, about 200 years later, a guy by the name of Augustine came along. And Augustine was the first to insist on a physical hell with eternal punishment. Now, I want you to see something here. Up until that time, which would have been over 300 years, almost 350 years, no one really held to a literal hell, a literal place of punishment forever for people. Now, one person came along, Augustine, who was a very, very gifted writer, speaker, and was someone who was very influential during his time. He wrote mostly from around the 370s AD to the 420s AD. So he was around at least about 40 or 50 years, and he had a tremendous, tremendous influence on the church, especially post-Constantine. Because before Augustine came along, very few people actually believed in eternal punishment with no restoration. It's not that they didn't believe in a place of discipline. They did, but they saw it as purification. That if people went there, it was so that they could be purified and then brought back in restoration to the presence of the Lord. But with Augustine really came up with the understanding that, hey, no, God is just to do that, and he has the right to throw people in eternal punishment forever. Eventually, the Catholic Church, in their Latin versions, began to use the word infernus, which is Latin, in place of these four words that we've just talked about. And it was this word infernus that had the ideal of an eternal punishment. And so their Latin versions would have that. By the 17th century, hell was considered to be a real place with punishment and separation from God's presence. And the Catholic Church is the one that developed that. And even after the Reformation, the Reformers did not change that. They continued to hold on to it. Now, more liberal theologians began to doubt the existence of hell by the 18th century, especially the latter part of the 18th century. But they were held back by a concern that if the doctrine of eternal punishment was universally abandoned, there would be no way of halting the slide of a society into gross wickedness, as though it wasn't already in gross wickedness. It was considered preferable for potential malefactors to be restrained by this fictitious fear of hell than for the truth of the non-existence of hell to be declared indiscriminately. Jonathan Edwards, in his message, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, in 1741, made use of the imagery of hell and endless punishments for those who rejected Jesus. This was actually the beginning of the First Great Awakening that lasted for several years, probably 20, 25 years. And it was one of those things that people began to respond to that message out of fear. Even though there is no evidence that the threat of hell has ever had a lasting effect on societal behavior in general, people still bring this up. In fact, I've had this brought up to me many times when I've been teaching. Scott, if God doesn't have this threat, then we'll just do whatever we want to do. I got news for you. We're already doing whatever we want to do. Even if you believe it or don't believe it. People are already doing what they want to do. It doesn't work. The belief of hell, that's the biggest thing. The takeaway you should get from this video, the ideal of hell doesn't work. It never works. It never has worked. It never will work, because that's not how relationships are established. So eventually in the 19th century, evangelists would use hell in revival meetings. So now we're in the 1800s, and in churches to increase their baptisms and conversions. So this all in the early part of the 1800s began to develop. And by the latter part of the century, hell was a fixture in much of what evangelicals preached about, Protestants for that matter, Catholics. Hell was very, very high in the hierarchy of theology. The modern church has kept the use of hell as a tool really to spread the gospel and keep members in check in regards to behavior. TV evangelists, preachers, teachers of every denomination have used hell very effectively. Matter of fact, our society, because it comes out of this Judeo-Christian environment, really has been steeped in hell, this theology of hell. What I have found is that in today's modern church world, you find hell being used as people's hope for what those who have hurt them will get after they die. In other words, hopefully Hitler will end up in hell. Hopefully Osama bin Laden will end up in hell. Hopefully that boss that hurt me will be in hell. My dad who raped me will be in hell. I hope he's burning in hell. You ever heard that? I hope he's burning in hell. I'd be so happy. So glad he's dead. And I've heard that from people, from Christians. I even heard a woman whose son, get this, her son was gay. And I actually had met him. He was a great guy. And she, on her deathbed, wished for him to burn in hell because he was gay. Now that's what fundamentalist theology will get for you. Hatred, anger, resentment, bitterness, vengefulness. Of what value is that? I mean, think about it. Would you honestly do something like that to your neighbor? Put them into a place of burning fire? Punish them in agony? Would you really honestly want that for anybody? Well, if you and I would not want that for anybody, what makes you think God would do that? It is the height of pride to hold on to a theology of hell and propagate it and teach it and tell other people that they should believe it. It's just the height of pride. Wouldn't it be better to forgive people? Wouldn't it be better to forgive? I will say in the last 40 years, some have begun to understand that hell is not a literal place, nor is it something to be feared by an angry, punishing God. You know, Christian theology has morphed and changed dramatically over the years. Since the first century, it is really in an evolutionary process, always has been, and it always will be. And it's just kind of the nature of it. And so one of the things that has impacted this is general revelation, that is study of everything that's not Jesus in the Bible, or miracles or signs. Everything that's not miracles, signs, Jesus in the Bible is general revelation. So that would mean study of science, study of history, study of anthropology, things of that nature. And the study of God's creation and the greater knowledge that we're receiving today has opened our eyes to the reality of a good and loving God. I mean, the universe is so large that our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, is like a speck of dust, a grain of sand on the seashore in comparison to the rest of God's creation. And if you took one grain from the seashore, would you notice it? No. You literally could take the billions of stars and planets in the Milky Way galaxy, remove them from the totality of the universe, and you wouldn't even notice it. You wouldn't even notice it. I have news for you. That God is bigger than your theology. He's bigger than your belief system. He's bigger than your fear of hell. He's bigger than the church or Churchianity and religion and belief systems. Oh, so much bigger. And the earth is not the center of the world, of the universe. The earth is not the center of the universe. It's not. It's just one little small speck of sand on the seashore in comparison to everything else that's going on. And the universe is so large, we really cannot comprehend how big it is. You see, this God, this divine source in life, is much greater than anything that you've developed or I have developed about hell. Could it be that you were wrong? Is it possible that you're wrong about hell? When I let go of that belief, there was a freedom and a joy and a peace that came to my soul that has been feeding me ever since. And it's interesting. I didn't go off into gross sin because now I can do anything I want because I'm in grace. No. It was a piece of soul that I just started to enjoy. And going off into all kinds of stuff was not really on my mind. It was the release of the burden, and I felt so thankful for. It just changed everything. I hope it'll do that for you. I want to finish with being free from the fear of hell and an angry God. The reason I do this is to help people get free of their fear of an angry God, the control of religion, and the endless cycle of trying to please people. And man, that's a full-time job. I have more people coming to me than ever before, needing to heal from traumatic religion, needing to heal from destructive dogma, needing to heal from people-pleasing, from legalism, and what it's done to their soul. Can you see, as the Apostle Paul did, that all is in Christ and it is all done? It's a finished work. That everything in Christ is done and it is all inclusive. Everything's included. There's nothing that's not included. There's no longer need for punishment because of the finished work of Christ for all people. There's no threats. There's nothing to be afraid of. In your union with Christ, you can live without fear. That's your inheritance. And life is an adventure. Life is moment by moment. Life is something that is a gift. And you get to be a part of it. And you don't have to worry about hell. You don't have to worry about punishment. People, listen. Life's not that serious. You're taking life way too serious. Life's just not that serious. We're here for a little while and then we're gone. And we go back from whence we came. And we came from the bosom of God. That's where we started. We started with the light. The endless light. In Christ Jesus. And that's where we're going. But you never see Jesus threatening people with hell. He doesn't threaten anyone with hell. Someone wants to use the rich man and Lazarus, the parable, but that's not what Jesus is doing in that parable. He's using what the Pharisees taught against them. He really did that parable against the Pharisees because they thought they measured up and everybody else didn't. And then Jesus used Lazarus as the one who didn't measure up, and he was actually the one who ended up in heaven. And so he used their own theology against them. But that's not what that's about. Nothing is to be gained in the way of love by threats and fear. Relationships that are established through fear and a violation of mutual respect are not only dysfunctional in their nature, but abusive. I've been counseling people, doing spiritual counseling, discipleship, if you will, for over 30 years. I have a program now called Steps to Thriving. And many, many people have gone through that program. And what I have found is that their relationship with God started and was based in legalism. It was based on, if you perform, God will do this. And there always hung over them this fear of going to hell when they died. I remember a guy that I went to school with in seminary years ago, back in the mid-90s, and he was a guy I'd really become friends with. And he one time told me, I don't want to go to hell when I die. I'm scared to death I'm going to go to hell when I die. This guy's in seminary. He was a youth minister. I'm scared to death I'm going to go to hell when I die. He was probably, at that time, he was probably close to 30, about 29. I was probably right at 30, 29. We were both the same age. And I thought to myself, how many times have I've thought about that too? We're both seminary students, and we have still not gotten free of the fear of hell. If we haven't gotten free of it, how are we going to help others do that? And how can you really enjoy this life? You see, Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. I'm so glad that Jesus didn't say, I came to instill the fear of hell in them to see to it that they know it's real. But boy, don't tell that to the church. They don't understand that. This is a problem. Nothing is to be gained in the way of love by threats and fear. No relationship will grow through threats and fear. Threats and fear don't do anything but hurt and harm relationships. It's a good way to end a marriage. It's a good way to end a friendship. It's a good way to end a partnership. Threats and fear will get you nowhere. And if it doesn't get you anywhere, why would God use it? I'm going to leave you with this story. What if when my wife and I were dating and I had come to the point that I wanted to marry her, and I said, Cindy, I want to marry you, and I would like for you to be my wife. But I want you to take a little time. I want you to love me, accept me into your life, but I want you to think about it, and when I come back, we'll talk about it. But here's one thing I do want to warn you about. If when I come back to talk to you, you reject my proposal of marriage and you reject loving me, then you have to know that I will torture you forever and ever. So just be careful with that. Now, what woman in her right mind would say yes to me? I'm a psychopath. And you see, that's what we've done with God. We've turned him into a psychopath. But that's not who he is. He's pure, unadulterated love. Just pure love. And he loves you so much. He wants you just as you are. He wouldn't change a thing. He just wants you to see that. And there's no hell for you to fear except in your mind. Now, I think you can create your own hell, and I've seen that happen. You can, with your mind and your actions, you can create hell. And you can live in it. I've seen it. But there's no place to go to that he's going to punish you. There's no place that he's going to commit all types of evil atrocities against you, which is basically what that is. Just love. Here's the thing. If you're willing to look at this in a new light, and that's all I'm asking, would you be willing to look at this in a new light? Deconstruct this thing that's been so fearful for so many for so long. And I promise you this, if you're willing to do that, you will find the greatest peace and joy that comes with it. Because your heart is being filled with unconditional love. Not based on what you do, but just based on the fact that you're lovable. You were made that way. You're worthy of love. And you're worthy not to be thrown into a place called hell. Just because you're God's daughter, God's son. I encourage you. Would you change your mind? Would you shift your thinking? Would you be willing to see that God is not threatening you with anything? All he's ever wanted was you, to love you, so that you could see that you're worthy to be loved.